Okay, there we go. Okay, so as you guys remember, these are the ones that I want you guys to be part of and talk about. And this one is I think you guys should find some interesting stuff in. It's kind of an impact of technology on different areas of society, and I think all of us will have opinions on this. So the learning objectives on this are what is the relationship between IT investment and productivity growth in the United States? How will AI, machine learning, robotics, and natural language processing affect future workforces? What impact has the application of IT had on healthcare? So those are the big ones that we're going over tonight. Okay, so the impact of IT on the standard of living and worker productivity. So the GDP, or gross domestic product per capita, most widely used to measure the material standard of living in a country. The national GDP represents the total annual output of a nation's economy. I think pretty much everyone got this in our economics classes. If you want me to, I can do a rundown of some of that, but otherwise I'm just going to assume that the basics are okay on this. When they're talking about standard of living in the US, they're talking about like a baseline standard of living and in developed countries. So they're not talking about third world countries. They've improved for a long time, and the rate of change varies as a result of business cycles. So they're inextricably linked on that. Labor productivity. And if you guys are not talking about the ethics because you take it into a private channel, it's kind of hard for me to keep. Yeah, thanks. It's just hard for me to keep track of what's being a question and what's just a conversation. Labor productivity is a measure of economic performance that compares the amount of goods and services produced or output with the number of labor hours used in producing those goods and services. It equals the real output per labor hour. Growth equals output increases faster than labor hours, and growth due in part to modern management techniques and automated technology. So we've seen a bunch of this, especially in the industrialized nations, when you see what has changed in like the factory environments and the automation of factories. There's a lot of that there. Innovation is a key factor in productivity improvement, and IT has played an important role in enabling any sort of innovation that's been part of the most recent development. Okay, fundamental drivers for productivity performance. Yeah, a lot of people believe that automation took their jobs, but what they found is automation changed the jobs. So while it did take that particular job, a lot of the times it will also open up different jobs, but that does require job training. And
the people don't want to change.
Yeah, and that is always a hard sell, trying to get people to change, because you get used to something, and then your entire career track changes, and people don't like change. It's something that can be very difficult for them. So in this particular fight, when it comes to automation, that's usually the argument. We don't want to change, but after a while, it's usually I'd like to make money. So it's either would you like to make money or would you like to not have a job? So that's what a lot of factory owners have done. So reduce the amount of input required to produce a given output by consolidating operations to better leverage economies of scale and improving performance by becoming more efficient. Increase the value of output production by a given amount of input by selling higher value goods and services, and selling more goods and services to increase capacity and use of existing resources. Some factors affecting national productivity rates. Labor productivity rates are affected by business cycles of expansion and contraction. You'll see that especially when we were talking about things like the recessions, and that'll do your, you'll see contraction from that. Expansion, you'll see everything go out, and it's just natural for you to see expansion and contraction. It's a good business has doesn't go so far out on expansion that when the contraction hits for things like that they don't lose a major chunk of their business. Outsourcing to contractors can skew productivity. Regulations that simplify hiring and firing workers make it easier for market to relocate workers to more productive firms and sectors. Competitive markets for goods and services provide incentives for innovation. It is more difficult to measure output in service-based economies. IT investments don't always yield tangible results, but may produce intangible benefits. So these are your factors for productivity rates. And, some of them are good, some of them are bad, and some of them are things that you kind of have to work around when you're dealing with any sort of work environment. Okay, now we're working into the IT stuff. Artificial intelligence. So an interdisciplinary field in which experts ponder philosophical issues such as the nature of the human mind and the ethics of creating objects gifted with human-like intelligence. And then there's artificial intelligence systems, the people, procedures, hardware, software, data, and knowledge needed to develop computer systems and machines that can simulate human intelligence processes, including learning, reasoning, and self-correction. And then there's machine learning. I think we're just defining out the sections that we're hearing. This is a type of AI involving computer programs that can learn and improve performance with experience. There are three major components: a model, parameters, and the learner. Input is fed into the model, which makes prediction. The learner component compares the prediction with reality and uses the difference between the two to modify the parameters. The learning process is repeated until the system is able to make sufficiently accurate predictions. And then natural language processing, robotics, is a type of that. It's a branch of engineering involving development and manufacture of mechanical or computer devices that perform tasks that require a high degree of precision or are tedious/hazardous for humans, like painting cars or precision welding. Natural language processing is an aspect of our AI that involves technology that allows computers to understand, analyze, manipulate, and or generate, quote, natural languages such as English. Yeah, robotics it's amazing how many different things go into robotics. If you ever want to see something really interesting, I think it's Boston Robotics Lab, where they have the little, it's not little, the dog thing that they did. I watched a special on just the computations they needed when they shoved it for it to rewrite and move around so that it could self-write itself. And it was amazing how much code was required just for that. So Boston Dynamics, thank you. Yeah, that's if you want some really interesting stuff on, that's really interesting. Just seeing how much is involved in a advanced robotics process. So then it looks like we're going on to healthcare. Before we hit healthcare, when we're talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, I'm not sure if they're going to go into some of the other stuff on here that I wanted to talk about. We've talked a little bit about the ethics behind AI and machine learning and how we as people accidentally teach machines our biases. And I want you guys to think about the ethics of having only one set of people teach something through machine learning instead of having a diverse group of people teach them multiple things or go through and look at the data and go, hey, did you notice this? And then feed it new data. So in my opinion, and this is my opinion, I think that you need diversity when it comes to inputting your data. Otherwise, you run into problems like we have with artificial intelligence in things right now. And that's that it has a tendency to skew towards one side because you just don't think of inputting some data there. Yeah, and there's like the chat bot and things like that. And I think the further along those get, you're going to start seeing the biases of the programs popping out too, or the programmers. So what do you guys think about the increased usage of machine learning for projects like that? Do you think we're going to continue to see problems unless we adjust?
I think problems are inevitable, just like anytime we're starting to try and implement something new. And yeah, it's going to take a lot of adjustments, but that's going to be slow to come because, as we said before, people don't like change, and they definitely don't like being called out on their own faults or biases.
Yeah, that is very true. Mike?
Personally, so I grew up watching movies like Terminator and all other Doomsday movies and whatnot. So I might be a little biased myself, but I'm kind of wary about the growth in AI. Unless we have like secure, hey, so they're not allowed to do X, Y, and Z rules and whatnot, and they're not allowed to break those rules and everything else. I think it could be a good thing and it could be a bad thing. But right now, I'm kind of more leaning towards. I personally
What
don't.
kind of limits do they have, and do they have any limits? Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. No, that's actually an increasing worry with the chatbot conversations that I've seen online. In fact, there are several tech companies that are asking, "Hey, can you guys hang back for about 6 months so that we can catch up because you're overwhelming us on teaching that." And so that one's kind of interesting too on that. Daniel?
Yeah, along those same veins, I kind of think that it's going to flame out spectacularly if I'm not, or if I'm being reasonable, because I think when you think about how much easier it would be to effectively put liability on the programmer who makes the actual thing itself, there's going to be a lot of legal questions that end up creating the bumpers. But until then, I think it's just full steam ahead. Something's going to break, and it's going to be a reaction, not a proactive approach to it.
Yeah, I could see that too, until it does something that somebody can get sued over, or it hurts somebody, they're just going to pile on. But the minute it does, it's going to go out in flames. I would agree with that. They are quite quick to sue people for things like that. So that is a legitimate worry.
It's one of those things where it's they need something that's so egregious to like build precedent from there to give bumpers, but like it is what it is, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay, I saw 2 raised hands. German?
Um, it just makes me think of like the Tesla, how, Elon has, the fully automated driving, and
Right.
and people just kind of like, I wouldn't say they abused it, but yeah, it does cost. I think it's like 10 grand more if I remember right. I don't know now if it's still around the same price, but they paid for the service and they just try and take advantage, whether it's sleeping at the wheel with like a foot on the a
Right.
foot on there, and then it's like, well, at a certain point, it's just hard to hold people accountable when they're like, well, I paid for this, I really wanted to just maximize in every way, even if it's not safe, per se. It's just hard to find those lines where people just want to go, where is accountability set, and people just tend to just really say, well, they let me do it, so obviously it's not my fault. So I just think people have always taken advantage of situations like that, whether especially in technology, they're always going to be like, well, let me do it. So
That's
you know.
good enough. Let's keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's there's just definitely it's why there's always conversations of just being conscientious and being able to just take a step back and go, is this really responsible? And a lot of people just don't really think about
Yeah.
situations like that. And when at the end of the day, companies want to just think of responsible people, and there's definitely those people that it does it's really helpful for. But there's
Mhm.
definitely just going to be those outliers of just
Yeah.
horrendous actions that people do, and they're just like, well, this is what I'm going to do with it. And yeah, I might cause an accident, if something ever happens, but it's
Yeah.
not my fault because they let me do it.
Yeah. It's not my responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just realized I may be pronouncing your name wrong. Is it Stephen or Stefan?
Steven, Steve, hey you, it all works.
Okay. Hey, you're up.
Yeah, so the big issue is it's going to be like everything else. No one in our day or this day and age takes personal accountability for anything they do. It's always someone else. And then you add in the fact that you're trying to automate all these things. And as someone pointed out earlier, we as a society are reactive, not proactive, which means
Yep.
something's going to happen. It's going to blow up. It's going to then be blown hugely out of proportion.
Right.
And then they're going to try and litigate what can and can't be done with it into the ground, and more importantly, into basically obscurity.
Yeah. 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 I think that's probably what's going to happen too. I mean, that's been the pattern of the past 10 years. Well, more than that, but especially with AI. Okay. Moving on to healthcare spending. Does anyone have anything else they want to add about AI and machine learning before I go on? We good? Okay. So in 2015, US healthcare spending hit an estimated 3.2 trillion, which accounts for 17.8% of the GDP. Healthcare spending is expected to grow an average of 5.6% per year. Growth rate is 1.2 percentage points faster than the projected GDP growth. And by 2025, healthcare spending will account for 19.9% of the GDP, which doesn't seem like much until you look at how much the GDP is, and then it's quite large. Healthcare spending growth is largely due to three causes: the continued aging of the population, because we've got technology. Red cat, no. We've got technology that's allowing us to live longer and longer. We have government policies that require certain, actual care policies that are in place. We have lifestyle changes that have also helped with, extended life capacity and things like that. Then development and use of new medical technology has also contributed to the increase of healthcare spending per person. To regain control over soaring healthcare costs, we need to raise patient awareness and manage technology costs. And then we're going to go through some sections here that talk about the different electronic issues with healthcare stuff. So EMR is electronic medical record, and that's a collection of health-related information on an individual that's created and consulted by staff within a single healthcare organization. Electronic health record, that's a comprehensive view of a patient's complete medical history designed to be shared with providers from more than one organization. The PHR, those are portions of the EHR routinely shared with the patient, like contact information, health provider information, medical history, and test results. And then there's health information exchange. That's the process of sharing patient-level electronic health information between different organizations. So, for example, a lot of places have urgent care that is run by a different company or than your regular hospital. And then you have all the different places for like your anesthesiologist. And so you have to be able to share your records around, but you don't necessarily need to share every single piece of information in there. So that's why they have those different levels delineated there. So Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act or High Tech Act. Somebody had to try really hard to get that one. That passed in 2009. This established a program to incentivize physicians and hospitals to implement EHR systems. It increased Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement to doctors and hospitals that demonstrated, quote, meaningful use of EHR technology. This was because they were trying to push people away from a lot of just like the hand records that are very difficult to or keep track of, that you couldn't pass back and forth, and they wanted to have a lot more trackability, and it's very difficult to put an audit log in on records when there is no actual record that people share. So there's a whole bunch of reasons that they wanted this to happen. Okay. So the benefits of EHRs, EMRs, PHRs, and HIEs. So the benefits for providers: quick access to patient records, more coordinated, efficient care, enhanced decision support, clinical alerts, reminders, and medical information, performance improving tools and real-time reporting, legible, complete documentation for accurate coding and billing. And as someone who's worked with doctors, I have got to tell you that is incredibly important. My signature isn't great from working in a job. It was legible until I worked with law enforcement and had to sign 50 bazillion things a day. And then it just got horribly illegible after that. And I think that's exactly what happens with doctors. When you're trying to read their documentation, it is terrible. So having it computerized gives you that added level of safety. Interfaces with labs, registries, and other EHRs, it's safer and more reliable. Benefits for patients: a reduced need to fill out the same form over and over and over again, reliable point of care information, convenience of e-prescriptions, patient portals with online interactions with providers, electronic referrals, which are easier access to follow-up care. So you don't have your little printed referral that you have to go run in and give to the person. And yeah, it's a mess. As someone who's had to go to a lot of doctors in my life, you can tell this has been irritating to me. Benefits for insurance companies: it's more efficient and accurate to allocate costs for services, lower healthcare costs due to reduced care and redundancies, and for reduced care, redundancies, and readmissions. So it's because it was easier to track things all the way across. Well, I'll give you an example of, I have a lot of allergies to medications. And sometimes when you tell a medical professional, I am allergic to this antibiotic, there's a small percentage of them that are like, yeah, that I don't believe you, and they'll try to give it to you anyway. But when you have records like this, you can say, no, I'm allergic to it. Go check my patient records, and you can see exactly what I'm allergic to and what reactions I've had. I've actually had to use this because I had someone try to inject me with one that I was violently allergic to. And it's not a particularly fun feeling, feeling like you have to, body block yourself from getting injected with something that could kill you. But at least you have a backup. You shouldn't have to argue about that in the first place, but at least you have a backup that you can go say, maybe you should go read your records, and I'm not lying, it's in the records. Okay, next, clinical decision support and CPOE. So clinical decision support, or CDS, is a process and set of tools designed to enhance healthcare-related decision-making through the use of clinical knowledge and patient-specific information. It increases the quality of patient care, cuts cost, helps prevent errors and adverse events, and it boosts provider and patient satisfaction. Computerized provider order entry systems they enable physicians to place and transmit orders like for drugs, laboratory tests, radiology, and physical therapy, all electronically. And that reduces having that and having the actual physician be able to put those in. It reduces the amount of errors that you have from having intermediary people go, I think this is what this says, and putting that in. And then the CDS on there, having that allows you a better tracking of your records. It gives the decision support. They have more information to make those decisions with too. So, I mean, they can go back and look at a whole bunch of tests and say, oh, hey, there's this thing that I could have tested for, but I see they already did it, so we didn't need to do that. You know, that's where that benefits kind of everyone. Okay, telehealth. This employs electronic information processing and telecommunications. It supports at-a-distance healthcare, provides professional and patient health-related training, supports healthcare administration. Telemedicine involves providing medical care to people at a location different from the healthcare provider. Store and forward telemedicine. This involves acquiring data, images, and video from a patient and transmitting everything to a medical specialist for later evaluation. Does not require the presence of the patient and care provider at the same time. So we've seen, especially with COVID, this took a big leap in the last couple of years because of COVID. I'm not sure, but I didn't use telehealth before, but then my job was like, hey, we'll waive any co-pays if you guys will try the telehealth stuff. And so a bunch of us, you know, I think everyone I know has tried it now because it was like a safety issue and reduce, you know, chance of us going out there and giving people the chance of the health providers getting it. I mean, I think it made a big difference during COVID. It allowed a little poor overworked healthcare people to you know, do things at a distance and not put themselves in as much danger. But have all of you had access to this or had a chance to use it?
Yeah, the whole point was the ounce of prevention equals a pound of cure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, there are some things that you do just have to go in for. Yep. Yeah, and then teletherapists, that's another thing they have that you can do now.
Yeah, I remember teletherapy or I think it was pharmacist or basically there was a controversy of they were being used to be easy ways to get like Adderall prescriptions and stuff to just sell.
Oh, I could see that. Yeah, there was a bit of a controversy with one of the teletherapy ones, because if you didn't read the stuff very carefully, then you didn't see that they were not encrypting all of the information on your patient files, and some of it they were selling. So they got in a lot of trouble. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. So one of the things that I tell people whenever I teach classes about keeping your data safe is make sure that you actually look at how they keep your medical data safe if you're going to use one of these, because it's very easy for these people, if they don't understand, especially with healthcare information, to have something go horribly wrong very quickly.
Actually, I had a question on that.
Yep.
I'm not sure if we talked about it last week, but when it came to the laws protecting personal information,
Mhm.
can you effectively sign that away? Like, if the people didn't read I guess the TOS or the EULA, and like, is the only backlash just social, or is there actual like legal?
Because of HIPAA, it's considered a HIPAA violation because you can't really sign away your rights when it comes to that. So the people that had this got fined heavily because it was considered a breach of healthcare data. So there are sometimes when it comes to like the cookies and things like that, you know, we don't currently have a law that allows you not to sign those away. But when it comes to things like medical data and billing data, you know, there's HIPAA, and when it comes to kids information, we have COPA. Those are there just to create steps so you can't accidentally sign that information away. Although I should say can't accidentally, there's got to be somebody out there somewhere that has found a way around it. Just, you know how it is. But that's what HIPAA was designed for, was to make sure that people who either tricked people or were going to use records for, you know, bad faith operations got punished. So, and HIPAA can get really expensive really fast, because if I remember correctly, the fines are per incident per record. So it can get brutal based on how much you've released. Live telemedicine. This one requires presence of patient and healthcare provider at different sites at the same time, usually video conference link between the two sites. Remote monitoring or home monitoring. Remember this one because I remember test questions with this one on it. Involves ongoing measurement of an individual's vital signs, temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing rate, and other health measures, glucose levels for diabetic, and the transmission of this data to healthcare providers. Mike, you had a question?
More of a comment. I've actually had experience with this remote monitoring.
Mhm.
So I have sleep apnea, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm diagnosed through the VA to have it like taken care of and whatnot. But when I got it done is during like the height of COVID, so I wasn't able to actually go in there and sit down and have them do it in person. So they sent me home with this little kit that I had to kind of hook up myself before I went to bed, and they're actually remote monitoring my stuff through that for a while.
Yeah, they've got some really amazing things they can do for remote monitoring now. I've seen it with sleep apnea. I have a sleep apnea machine too. I had, when I got COVID, I ended up with blood clots in my lungs, and the way that they had to measure the thickness or thinness of my blood after that, either I could go into the lab every day and let someone stick me with a needle, which no, I did not like that. Or there's a special program and there's like special equipment and stuff that you have to, you know, poke yourself and do the monitoring and things like that. And that, I mean, that wasn't available like even 5 years ago, I don't think, for this particular one. So it's kind of amazing that we have these medical machines that we can monitor and take this stuff and then give the information to our doctors so they can take care of it and keep an eye on it. I think it's one of the reasons that IT has continued to be intertwined with healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, legal and ethical questions associated with telemedicine. All right, so must physicians providing advice to patients at a remote location be licensed to perform medicine in that location, perhaps a different state or country? So as far as I know, there's like, they can't do international ones because of the way our insurance works here in the United States. But I think they can, because I've had doctors when I've called into services like this from different states. So I know there's like a national level because there's like a national database, but so it's not like a state. But when it comes to things like counseling, I'm not really sure how that works because I believe those have different state licenses that you have to do. So that's an interesting way to think about it. I'm just looking through the comments. So yeah, so if you have any comments on these right here, I'll just read through them. Must a healthcare system be required to possess a license from a state in which it has a virtual facility? Will states require assurance that minimum technological standards, such as minimum resolution of network transmitted images, are being met? What sort of system certification is necessary to ensure that a critical system performs as expected in crisis situations, and what are the ramifications if it does not? So what are you guys' thoughts on this? Anybody? Okay.
I guess if like, because counseling can be a lot of different things. So like, I guess if you're going off of licensing, I'm not quite sure if because I know that like certain states have different bars that you have to take, like the
Mhm.
California bar supersedes the universal bar, like the federal bar or whatever.
Right.
I'm not sure if that's the same thing for therapists, but I'd assume that like crisis hotlines versus, you know, weekly therapy visits being equally available are two very separate things. So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not
that's a
quite
good
sure.
point.
I think if it's a per state thing, then yeah, it makes sense to have if a virtual facility doesn't have licensure in the state, or at least awareness of the regulations, then yeah, that's a no-go. But the keeping a system performing as expected in a crisis, that one, I'm not quite sure how you'd really even-handedly across the board make that a universal.
I think personally, I think the only way that you would do that is you would have to put some sort of a protocol or procedure in that says that they have to be audited periodically. I think that's pretty much the only way that you could make sure that they actually are doing the technological standards, is that they either have to show proof and then be audited, because I don't see any other way short of showing proof, because otherwise they'd just be like, yeah, sure, we're fine. And then what do you guys think about the what do you call it, the resolution images? Because you wouldn't think that would be a big deal, but if you're swapping back high resolution images of things like cancer cells and things like that, you would definitely want those to be much higher resolution. So if you run into a problem as a healthcare professional and suddenly they don't do high image transmissions for your network, I think that I'd be very upset personally if I was the person. But do you think that that would have to be should be a requirement? Mike?
I think like yeah, I think there should be a standard that's basically nationwide for that kind of stuff. Well, as I said in chat, like, I think it definitely need to be something that, I hate to say it, but the government would have to mandate in order for everyone to actually apply. Because we can be like, oh yeah, you guys should all need to have high resolution images, and some go, oh yeah, sure, whatever, and not doing it. So it
It'd
definitely
have
need
to be something like a tack on to HIPAA or a law like HIPAA. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
German?
Just tag on Mike's comment. I think the bottom line is people want a good standard of healthcare. Whether it's whoever does it, in state, out of state. I think there's just a certain standard and level that everybody wants. They want to feel, which is, if you look into like the psychology of like why people get sued or why doctors get sued, there's a certain sense of comfortability that doctors try and really communicate with patients to make them feel comfortable, even if the doctor is wrong, right? And makes an incorrect diagnosis, whether it was from miscommunication or something wasn't mentioned, whatever the situation may be. I think there's still going to be the patients that want the certain healthcare, whether or not it's a certain certification. Just like Mike was saying, if there was a standard level for everybody, we could mitigate a lot of these
Right.
situations. If the high resolutions for all your imaging, if everybody had a certain understanding of medical practice, and everybody was certified to a certain degree, the hard part is accepting that, especially in medical sense, right? You never want to hear the words like well, this is as much as I can tell you because this is as
Right.
much as I know. And you never want to
I
hear
can't
that.
really tell because yeah.
And you never, you expect these doctors, right? Everybody has this image of they must know everything. And it's hard in the sense that, as I mentioned before, it's a having a robust knowledge of medicine takes a long time. And I can, versus
Yeah.
a doctor who's done it for 30 years versus a doctor who's only done it for 3 or 5, the amount of knowledge and experience that they have is worlds apart, right?
Mhm.
But that it still doesn't change the fact that you wish that the doctor who's only done it for 5 years was just as good as your doctor who's done it for 30, but that can't be the case.
Yeah, it's just not physically possible.
Your entry level IT,
Mhm.
they're not going to be as good as your master's degree, who's done it for 20 plus years, who's
Right. Yeah. It's
studied
just
abroad too.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah. But when you try and it's upsetting because everybody wants a label on everything because they expect a certain level. I mean, there's a certain line where you have to draw and say people are new, and I get that everybody also wants a certain standard, but with a certain standard, you also have to accept a certain amount of experience,
Right.
which will not equate for what you want 100% of the time.
Yeah.
I've been to doctors who we've had repeated conversations because I've been to multiple states. I'll always have the same conversations. And a lot of times if I tell them, no, I don't like that, they get taken aback. And it's not to undermine their education in any sense. I've had those conversations with
Mhm.
them, but it's because I've gone through situations before and I don't feel comfortable
Yeah.
going through that again. And it's not their fault, right? I
No,
don't hold
yeah.
them accountable for it. And it's not their teaching. I'm not, undermining it. I know
Yeah.
what I want and I know what's expected. And if something's not going to help, I already know I don't want to just go through that
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
aimlessly.
Yeah.
And
There's
just with everything else on top of it. Yeah.
there's another issue to throw on top of that
Mhm.
is the fact everyone, especially with what we pay in America for healthcare, everyone with the amount that we have to pay compared to other people, you expect high levels of care.
Yeah, you do.
And then you add in the fact that, as he was saying, you're not going to get the same amount of experience from a guy who's been doing it for just got his degree versus decades plus of
Right.
experience,
Yeah.
but you're paying the same cost.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then at that point, that's where a lot of the people start getting sue
Picked
happy. I
off
mean,
about,
well,
yeah.
I shouldn't say that because people will sue for anything nowadays.
Yeah.
But
I think there should be laws
um,
about what you can and can't sue for, but
but yeah, that's one of the huge issues is just the amount of experience necessary in a field like healthcare. And then the fact is you can't pay for a better doctor. You get what you get, and you're getting charged by
unless
the
you're
company who
significantly
employs-
wealthy and you can do one of those, where they call
Yes.
them, the ones that come to your house that are
Personal
super,
healthcare.
super expensive. Yeah, for the rest of us, it's not gonna happen.
And then you add in the fact of if there was any sort of certification system for online, it would mean that obviously the government would have to be involved, and then everyone would be getting the same certification, but you'd sit there and you'd have doctors who have way more experience not wanting to do, because that's the other huge
Why should
issue
I have to
is-
do this if these whippersnappers
Yeah.
have to do this? I know they wouldn't say whippersnappers, but you know what I mean? Yep. Yeah, that's one of those, also with the change, when you're changing to new standards, some of the older doctors, some of them will just retire because they don't want to do the new standards. So that's also something to think about too. All right. So summary, the relationship between IT investment and productivity growth. So we were talking about the GDP, and that was the most used for material standard of living. And the standard of living in US and most developed countries has been improving, although it varies from year to year. Labor productivity is a measure of economic performance that compares the amount of goods and services with the number of labor hours used to produce those goods and services. And then what is the relationship between IT investment and productivity growth in the United States? We were talking about innovation is key to productivity improvement, and IT plays a critical role in innovation. It's difficult to quantify the benefits of IT investments on worker productivity due to a lag between application of an IT solution and the capture of significant productivity gains. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. I know that all of us have experienced this. It's very difficult to have metrics measured when there is no metric made up for the measurements. And you see this happen a lot with different things like HR solutions and people tracking and even security stuff when they're being used to monitor workers. So how many of you guys have run into situations like this within work where they're using some sort of either brand new metric or a product that they want to use for work improvement or productivity, and they don't really have any way to really measure it? Mike?
So I actually kind of experienced this through my work. Last year they implemented goals, but they're basically what they do is my boss would go to a meeting and they go, okay, so here's what we want to see for everyone's goals, and they just kind of piecemeal out month by month. So every month is like, okay, hey, we have some more addition stuff to the goals that you now need to have this. You guys need to have it measured like this. You guys need to have it measured like you guys need to have it included in this kind of format. And it wasn't all at once; it was just month by month. So it's like it's kind of a cluster F. Then on top of that, right? Okay, so we're going to do, since I'm a technical writer, we're going to need to show our technical documentation on how we're updating and how we're going to do that. So we decided to basically take everything that we have, everything that we're in charge of, divide by 12, which would give us, okay, hey, so we're supposed to have this many documents updated this by this month. Then from there we divide it even further by 3 because there's 3 people on my team. And I personally just opened up an Excel document and just kept track of all the documents I was kind of working on throughout the month. And then for this year, that's why I'm basing my performance on was how well I compared to last year. So I just found some experience.
And that's another thing that you guys have probably run into. This is something I've run into. When their metrics don't particularly make sense, you make up your own to keep track of your own productivity. That's always something that's whatever makes sense to you, and you can keep track of your own productivity. Make notes, take notes of the projects you're on, because there's a lot of times when your employers, they have a lot more people to keep track of, they'll miss stuff. So you may not get kudos for something, or it might have something that would make a really good addition to your resume, but it got missed because they weren't paying attention to, whatever you were working on at that given time. So that's also something to think about. German?
I was gonna note with the productivity, another thing they might notice, or they may have just, what's the correct phrasing? Because it's hard to, so in my situation, I used to work in a warehouse where they used metrics to measure how long it would take for someone to select a box, put on a pallet, build, a 7-foot tall pallet, 2 of them, and they did a certain measurement, accounted for the time. And then what ended up happening was that when they had engineers come in to go over those standards, one certain employee who was very good at doing the job ended up being the prime example that was used for the time allotments, right? And which isn't
It's not
a
an
bad.
average employee speed.
Yeah.
You can't
And
take the person with the best speeds and use that as an average employee. Yeah.
and that's something that's very common to see. Obviously the company had their thoughts going in their own direction, but as far as for everybody else, everybody else saw the flaw in the system. Anyway, what ended up happening was that over the course of the time, a lot of the employees who couldn't make time were just let go, and it's gone to the point where at this point, as far as I know now, they don't even hold people accountable to the 100% because they can't find employees, and the employees
It's
that they
not
do
physically possible.
yeah. So it's one of those things, they just they shot themselves in the foot, which is to say,
Mhm.
because they probably thought that they paid well, but looking back on it, it wasn't
It's
worth
kind of
the
a
amount.
work money balance thing.
Yeah, and once the job market started fluctuating, people realized that you
We
can
don't
make
have to
way more.
stay.
You don't have to kill yourself every day to make that sort of money,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so a lot of them ended up leaving. And it was just it's those hindsights though that they try to use technology, but then they got the standard, and then they still knew what the proper standard was. They
Mhm.
deviated from the data, and they still did a manual entry for what they were doing. And
Right.
it's almost like it's just low as
Yeah.
and you see it happening, and especially like even customer service, like working as a customer
Yeah.
service agent, you see that often as well. You go, well, if they tell you all these metrics for
This is
contact
how long you can
resolution.
keep them on the phone, and yeah.
Yeah, but you don't want to sound like a salesman, but they want
Yep.
you to sound authentic. And whenever
Mhm.
you do try and, for me, it was whenever I was an authentic person, it was, it was my calls were the opposite of what their metrics were. I didn't,
Mhm.
I wasn't hitting all
Yeah,
their
you
little
can't really
tallies or
sound like
whatever.
an authentic person and have the times that they had listed. Yeah. Yeah, I can absolutely believe that.
So it's just, I can see what they want. But
Mhm.
as far as for a lot of those companies, especially now, they've changed their strategies because a lot of the people are going online, and and it's hard to,
Yeah.
it's like you said, some doctors may just retire at that point. There's a lot of companies that laid off a lot of people that work from home because even the call volume would go down because they were just forced so many people to go paperless,
Mhm.
and go from talking to agents anymore, and
Yeah.
just using that data to just minimize and minimize and minimize, where they just have to change the company focus at a certain degree to just survive in that sector. But
Yeah.
it was just interesting to see that even with the technology that they had, they just use it to just
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
the undermine it and just do their own thing. It's just
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the times that's the pitfall, is they look more at numbers than people. And if you do that, then people are like, I don't want to work there. That is a terrible work environment. And sometimes they forget productivity. One of the things that helps productivity is if your people actually care about their work environment. So next, we were talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and all that. So advances in AI, machine learning, robotics, and natural language processing are fundamentally changing the way that work gets done. Research suggests 45% of human work activities could be automated using existing technology. AI systems simulate human intelligence processes, including learning, reasoning, and self-correction. Machine learning involves computer programs that can learn a task and improve their performance with experience. And we've talked about this a couple of times, that the ethics behind robot learning, machine learning and AI. And so I think we've covered this one fairly well. We haven't really talked too much about robotics, but it's kind of right in there with AI, because usually they have to have things that are similar to AI for the more advanced robotics. But there are people that are like completely against any sort of robotics. So, you know, that's an interesting group to look at their stuff if you ever want to go read some yeah, Amish. Believe it or not, my dad is from Pennsylvania, where they have the Pennsylvania Dutch and Amish areas. So yes, they are, they do not use technology. But no, these are people that are very much against industrialization, moving towards robots and things in factories. What impact has application of IT had on healthcare? We were talking about the increased aging population, and then we have increased spending, and then we have the increase in technologies used to keep track of patients and their I almost said patient metrics, but basically that's what they are. And it helps keep track of everything from blood pressure to you know, like sugars and things like that for diabetics. And this is the whole thing we were talking about with those records. I'm just going through to see if there's anything else we need to talk about. Nope, that's it. It was just about the different types there. So that should give you guys a little bit of some information to think about for your group project, because there's a couple of different topics in there that are based around that. And like I said before, if there's a topic that you want to do that is not on that list, it just needs to be something related to IT security and ethics, basically. So it needs to be one topic that you guys write a paper on and get a presentation on, and it's just a minimum of 3 pages. So does anyone have any questions about that or want to make any comments about any of the stuff we covered tonight? You're done and you want to go home, and why hacking is a good thing. If you can spin it right, I'll let you use it. Yep. Yeah, use the Discord channel for your DM. You can use the other channels for voice and stuff. That's why I made those extra rooms in there so people could go in and use them for group team meetings. So okay, unless you need help with something, go get into your work, the Cisco and Cengage, and start looking at your group project, and shoot me any messages if you have any questions about anything. And you have a good night and have a great weekend, guys.